The Aeolus shuddered like a drunkard on a bender, her hull groaning as if in protest against the universe's latest cosmic joke. Captain Riven Larkspur, a man who wore cynicism like a second skin, clung to the command console with white-knuckled determination. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Too much to drink last night?" he muttered to the ship as if she might respond. The bridge was a cacophony of flickering lights and alarms, each vying for attention like needy children. "Captain, I've got a bad feeling about this," said Nix, the ship's engineer, her voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that could melt durasteel. Her pink hair was tied back in a haphazard ponytail, and her jumpsuit bore evidence of more than a few past misadventures with malfunctioning machinery. "Nix, sweetheart, you always have a bad feeling," Riven shot back, punching a few buttons in a futile attempt to quiet the chaos. "What's one more existential crisis among friends?" The ship lurched again, and the viewport displayed a swirling mass of color that looked suspiciously like a kaleidoscope on a sugar high. "That's new," Riven noted, feigning casual interest while his insides did somersaults. "Anyone want to bet that's not in the travel guide?" From the helm, Lex, the navigator and reigning champion of pessimism, groaned. "That's a hyperspace rift, Cap. They make black holes look like kiddie pools. And we're about to take a dive," Riven said, his attempt at humor falling flatter than a vacuum-sealed pancake. "Suggestions, crew, before we end up smeared across the fabric of the universe?" "Pray to whatever gods we haven't pissed off yet," Nix suggested, her fingers a blur over the console as she attempted to wrest some semblance of control from the ship. "I gave up on gods about the time I found out they weren't accepting my calls," Riven replied. "How about we try something that actually works?" The ship's systems shrieked like a banshee, and an unfamiliar voice crackled through the comms, smooth and unsettlingly calm. "Humans aboard Aeolus, your trajectory is most concerning. You're entering a restricted Althari rift zone." "Althari," Riven echoed, brows furrowing. The name was about as welcome as a tax audit. "Nix, tell me we didn't just wander into alien territory without knocking." Nix shrugged, a gesture that suggested she was more concerned with keeping the ship in one piece than diplomatic niceties. "Hey, I just work here." "Greetings, unknown entity," Riven said into the comms, slathering on the charm like a man about to be evicted from his last lifeboat. "Mind telling us what exactly a restricted zone entails?" "It entails your immediate departure, Captain Larkspur," the voice continued, managing to sound both authoritative and oddly condescending. "Your species has a history of complications." Lex snorted, adjusting the trajectory with as much grace as a one-legged dancer. "Complications. That's a polite way of saying we're a bunch of trigger-happy apes." Riven sighed, rubbing his temples. "Well, Mr. Althari, or Mrs., or however you prefer, we're kind of in a bind here. Our ship's about as cooperative as a cat in a bath. Any chance you could lend a hand?" A pause, as if the alien was consulting a manual on how to deal with insolent humans. "We will provide assistance. However, our concern remains. Human behavior in unknown territories is unpredictable." "Unpredictable?" Riven echoed, feigning offense. "We prefer the term adventurous." The alien voice continued, unperturbed. "We will guide you. Do not deviate from the path." "Deviate? Us?" Riven said, grinning at his crew. "We're paragons of conformity." The ship's movement stabilized, though the sense of impending doom lingered like a bad hangover. "Captain, you've got a plan for what happens when they realize we're not exactly model citizens?" Nix asked, her skepticism palpable. "Plan?" Riven said, voice dripping with faux confidence. "I thought we'd wing it." Lex sighed, shaking his head. "If we survive this, I'm writing a book. How Not to Explore the Galaxy, a Captain's Guide. Make sure to dedicate it to me," Riven replied, strapping himself into his seat as the ship settled into a new course. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the Aeolus's engines, now under the mysterious guidance of the Althari. The crew exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together, snark and all. "So," Nix said, breaking the silence with her usual lack of tact. "What do you think these Althari want?" Riven leaned back, arms crossed. "If they're anything like us, probably something tedious like peace or mutual understanding." Lex chuckled darkly. "Or they want to dissect us and study our organs." "Well, joke's on him," Nix said, a wicked grin spreading. "I've been told my liver's a lost cause." The comms crackled again, and the alien voice returned, dripping with politeness and an undercurrent of menace. "Prepare for docking, Captain." Riven nodded, more to himself than anyone else. "Right, let's go say hello to our new friends." The ship settled into the docking bay with a final, reluctant groan. The crew unstrapped themselves, exchanging nervous grins and half-hearted jibes as they prepared to meet their hosts. "Remember, smiles everyone," Riven said, leading the way to the airlock. "Let's not add," intergalactic incident, to our resume. The airlock hissed open, revealing a delegation of Althari. They stood tall and elegant, their forms seemingly woven from light and shadow. Riven wondered if their choice of aesthetic was deliberate or just another cosmic joke. "Welcome, humans," the lead Althari said, their voice resonating in the air. "We are curious about your kind." "Curious?" Riven replied, doing his best to appear nonchalant. "We're not that interesting, I assure you. Just your average spacefaring misfits." The Althari regarded him with expressions that were impossible to read. "Your kind is known for their volatility." "Volatility's a strong word," Lex interjected, always ready to stir the pot. "We prefer spirited." The lead Althari inclined their head, perhaps in amusement. "Spirited or not, our interest remains. We have much to discuss." "We're all ears," Riven said, hoping his bravado was more convincing than it felt. As they followed the Althari into the heart of the station, Riven couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just stepped into a trap of their own making. But then, wasn't that the human way? Charging headfirst into the unknown, armed with nothing but bravado and a knack for survival. Whatever lay ahead, Riven knew one thing for certain: it was going to make a hell of a story. The Aeolus settled uneasily in the docking bay, like a cat forced into a carrier for a trip to the vet. Captain Riven Larkspur and his motley crew stumbled out of their ship, the metallic clang of their boots echoing ominously in the cavernous space. The Althari delegation stood waiting, their silence as imposing as their otherworldly appearance. Riven was pretty sure they were built exclusively for disapproval and unspecified menace. "Nice place you got here," Riven said, trying to layer his voice with enough charm to stop a freight train. The Althari, unfortunately, seemed to have a similar resistance to charisma as they did to cheap human weapons. "Welcome," the lead Althari replied, voice smooth as an oil spill. "Please follow us." Riven exchanged a glance with Nix and Lex. The kind of glance that said, "Well, we're already here. Might as well see how this goes sideways." "After you," Riven gestured grandly, like a maitre d', leading guests to an especially toxic table. As they followed the Althari, the crew couldn't help but notice the lack of visible weaponry on their hosts. Not that it mattered, their own weapons had decided to take a power nap courtesy of some advanced Althari tech. Riven felt as naked as a hot dog at a vegan barbecue. "So," Nix whispered, her voice barely carrying over the gentle hum of the station, "anyone else worried about the fact that our guns are about as useful as a chocolate kettle right now?" "Relax," Riven replied, keeping his tone light. "I'm sure they've got something more exotic planned for us than a straightforward shooting." Spoken like a man who's never seen a horror vid in his life, Lex muttered, earning a chuckle from Nix. They were led into a spacious chamber that screamed intergalactic diplomacy, or maybe just intergalactic show-off. The walls shimmered with an iridescent sheen, and the air was filled with a subtle scent that Riven couldn't quite place. Something between lavender and a barely contained threat. "Please, be seated," the lead Althari said, gesturing to an array of strangely organic-looking chairs that seemed to shift slightly as they approached. Riven felt the chair mold itself to his form as he sat, and he couldn't help but laugh. "Well, this is cozy. Do they come with a massage function?" The Althari's expression, inscrutable as ever, remained unchanged. "Humor is noted, Captain Larkspur." "Great," Riven muttered under his breath. "At least they're taking notes." An awkward silence stretched, the kind only experienced in places where one side had the power to turn you into a fine mist if they were so inclined. Riven shifted in his seat, trying to project the kind of confidence that gets people elected to positions they have no business holding. "So," he began, his voice echoing in the chamber like a bad idea, "what exactly did you have in mind for this little chat?" "Just the usual, don't blow up our stuff, speech, or something more exciting?" The lead Althari, who Riven decided to mentally nickname tall, dark, and imposing, inclined their head. "Your species has a tendency to explore first, ask questions later. We are curious about your motivations." "Motivations?" Riven echoed, feigning confusion. "We're simple folk. See a shiny thing, want the shiny thing. It's practically in our DNA." Lex snorted. "Yeah, we're basically magpies with guns." Nix nodded sagely. "The guns are optional, depending on how shiny the thing is." The Althari seemed to deliberate on this, their silent communication stretching the seconds into an eternity. Riven was starting to think time itself was a weapon in the Althari arsenal. "You have entered our rift zone," the Althari finally said, their tone as serene as it was disconcerting. "An area of particular interest." "Interest," Riven repeated, tasting the word as if it might bite back. "Look, we're not here to cause trouble. Our ship had a little too much fun the night before, ended up in your backyard. No harm, no foul, right?" "Harm is relative," the Althari replied. "Human presence in this zone is unprecedented." Unprecedented, Nix repeated, glancing at Lex. That's a lovely euphemism for potentially catastrophic, isn't it? Lex shrugged. In our line of work, isn't everything? Riven leaned forward, hands steepled in an air of mock seriousness. Look, you guys seem nice enough, and I get the whole stay off my lawn vibe. But we're just trying to fix our ship and be on our way. No harm, no exploration of potentially universe-bending phenomena. The Althari studied them with eyes that seemed to pierce through to their very core. Riven had the distinct impression of a cat deciding whether it was worth the effort to swat a particularly annoying fly. You will remain here while we deliberate, the lead Althari finally said, standing with a grace that made Riven's own attempts at movement feel like a drunken giraffe on roller skates. Deliberate away, Riven replied, giving a mock salute. We'll be here, trying not to touch anything important. Or break it, Nix added helpfully. Or both, Lex concluded with a sigh. As the Althari left him alone in the chamber, Riven couldn't help but let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Well, that went surprisingly well. In what universe does that count as well? Lex demanded, arms crossed in a display of practiced exasperation. In one where we're still breathing, Riven replied, ever the optimist. Besides, the seats are comfy. Nix shook her head, pink hair swaying like a rebellious flag. Comfy seats aren't going to mean much if they decide they don't like us. True, Riven conceded, but it's the little things that count. Like not being vaporized immediately upon arrival. Lex wasn't convinced. I don't like it. They're too polite, and lacking in the whole kill the humans agenda, Riven pointed out. Which, in my book, is a big plus. Until they figure out how interesting our innards are, Nix mused, fiddling with a loose strap on her jumpsuit. The trio lapsed into silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It was the kind of silence that settled deep into the bones, made only worse by the knowledge that they were utterly outmatched. Whatever the Althari decided, they'd have to play along, at least until they could figure out an escape route that didn't involve being reduced to stardust. Think they've got snacks? Nix asked suddenly, her stomach audibly protesting the lack of sustenance. If they do, they're probably not designed for human consumption, Lex said, the corners of his mouth twitching upward despite himself. I've eaten worse, Riven replied, reclining as much as the chair would allow. Remember that time on Epsilon 9? Whatever that was they served us, I'm pretty sure it was moving. Nix grimaced. Don't remind me, I still have nightmares about that stew. Nightmares or not, Riven said, glancing over at the entrance the Althari had left through. We'll have to make nice until we can find a way out of this mess. Lex sighed, the sound full of a weariness that came from dealing with countless interstellar screw-ups. And if they decide they'd rather keep us here as pets? Riven shrugged. Well, it's either play nice or try to escape a station full of advanced aliens with nothing but our winning personalities and subpar engineering skills. Your pick. Winning personalities, Nix said with a scoff. More like, barely tolerable. Hey, speak for yourself, Riven shot back. I'm a delight. Before the debate over Riven's supposed charisma could spiral into further irreverence, the Althari re-entered the chamber, their movements as fluid as ever. Riven straightened in his seat, adopting the air of a man ready to negotiate his way out of a parking ticket, or, in this case, an interstellar diplomatic incident. The lead Althari resumed their seat, fixing the crew with their unsettlingly calm gaze. We have completed our initial deliberations. And, Riven prompted, trying not to fidget like a schoolboy caught doodling on his textbook. You will be allowed to leave, provided certain conditions are met. Conditions, Lex repeated, rubbing his temples. Why does that sound the opposite of comforting? Riven ignored him, focusing on the Althari. What kind of conditions are we talking about? The hyperspace rift zone is a significant area of study for us, the Althari explained. We require assurances that human interference will be minimal. Minimal interference, Nix muttered under her breath. That's like asking a dog not to chase its tail. Riven nodded, as if negotiations with unfathomably advanced aliens were an everyday occurrence. We can promise to keep our noses out of your business, assuming the nose in question isn't attached to someone with more curiosity than sense. The Althari, seemingly satisfied with this vague assurance, inclined their head. Further, we would appreciate a sample of human technology for study. Riven blinked. A sample of human tech? I hope you aren't counting on anything cutting edge. My datapad's been held together with duct tape for the past 3 light years. Nix snickered. Yeah, and the ship systems are more temperamental than a toddler post-nap. The Althari didn't seem fazed by their less-than-stellar recommendation. Something representative of your current capabilities will suffice. Lex sighed, resignation evident in his slumped posture. Let them have the old coffee maker. That thing's been on the fritz since before we left dock. Riven smirked. Perfect. A symbol of humanity's ingenuity, or lack thereof. The Althari inclined their head once more. These conditions, if met, will ensure safe passage out of our rift zone. Failure to comply will result in complications. Complications, Riven repeated, tasting the word like a bit of vintage. We'll do our best to avoid those. With the terms seemingly agreed upon, the Althari rose, signaling the end of their negotiation. You will be escorted back to your vessel to make preparations. As the crew was led back toward the Aeolus, Riven couldn't help but feel a shiver of relief mixed with the lingering taste of unease. So, minor miracle or just a stay of execution? He asked his crew. Let's call it a draw, Nyx replied, her hands already itching to get back to her console. Lex nodded, thoughtful. At least we get to live another day. Though if someone asks for my liver again, I'm taking it personally. Riven grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. Don't worry, if they wanted your liver, they'd have to pry it from you after a night at the starport bar. As they boarded their ship, the familiar hum of the Aeolus's systems greeting them like a long-lost friend, Riven knew they'd been lucky, this time. But luck was a fickle companion in the vast reaches of space, and they'd have to rely on more than just charm and sarcasm to navigate the challenges ahead. Right, let's get that coffee maker gift wrapped, Riven said, already planning their exit strategy. And let's make sure we don't run into any other, unprecedented, situations. And if we do? Lex asked, already knowing the answer. Then we wing it, Riven replied, a rogue's grin spreading. As always, the crew of the Aeolus got to work, a band of misfits in a universe that seemed determined to challenge them at every turn. And as they prepared to face whatever came next, Riven couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they'd come out on top, if only by sheer stubbornness and a knack for survival. The Aeolus hummed with the kind of disgruntled energy that only a ship having a very bad day could muster. Captain Riven Larkspur strolled down the corridor with a confidence that would have seemed charming if not for the chaos bubbling beneath his casual demeanor. Well, folks, it looks like we've pissed off the universe again, Riven announced, swinging into the control room where Nyx and Lex awaited, each looking like they'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. The ship's lights flickered in what Riven could only assume was a cosmic eye roll. What's new? Lex quipped, scratching at a stubbly chin that matched the perpetual 5 o'clock shadow of cynicism he wore like armor. Next thing, the coffee maker will explode. Don't tempt fate, Nyx warned, her fingers dancing across her console like a pianist trying to play a particularly tricky piece with missing keys. I've got enough on my plate without dodging scalding coffee. Funny you should mention that, Riven said, leaning over her shoulder with the gravity of a man who knew exactly how much trouble they were in. Because we've got a bit of a time issue. Nyx raised an eyebrow, a look that said she was prepared for anything, but secretly hoped fate would throw them a softball for once. A time issue? You could say we're in a bit of a loop, Riven replied, tapping the monitor where a strange fluctuation shimmered, a signature of the hyperspace rift they were currently unwelcome guests in. We might be experiencing, temporal hiccups. Temporal hiccups, Lex echoed, crossing his arms and leaning back in his chair with a sigh. Is that the technical term for, we're screwed? Something like that, Riven admitted, a grin tugging at his lips despite the looming disaster. We're caught in a time loop, and each reset seems to be playing merry hell with the ship's systems. Nyx groaned, the kind of sound that came from deep in the soul of someone who'd seen one too many bad days. So, we're stuck reliving the same moments over and over, like a broken record? Pretty much, Riven said, shrugging with a nonchalance that bordered on psychotic. Except instead of nostalgic tunes, we're getting system malfunctions and the occasional existential crisis. Lex snorted. Sounds like a typical Tuesday. Well, this Tuesday's got an extra helping of cosmic absurdity, Riven said, gesturing to the console. The main issue is that each loop seems to scramble the ship's systems more. If we don't fix it, we're going to end up with a ship that's more glitched than functional. Great, Nyx muttered, running a hand through her hair in frustration. That's all we need, a cosmic rerun of our failures. On the bright side, Lex added with a smirk, at least we get to relive my best jokes. No one's laughing, Lex, Nyx deadpanned, though a hint of a smile betrayed her annoyance. So, any brilliant ideas on how to fix this, Captain? Riven straightened up, putting on his best leader face. First, we need to isolate the loop's frequency and see if we can stabilize our systems long enough to break free. And how do we do that? Nyx asked, tapping away at her console with renewed determination. Simple, Riven replied. We improvise. Improvisation, Lex said, clapping his hands together. Otherwise known as winging it. Don't knock it till you try it, Riven shot back, turning to face the monitor. Nyx, see if you can get a read on the loop's frequency. We need to figure out what's causing these resets. On it, Nyx affirmed, her fingers flying over the controls like a virtuoso in the middle of a high-stakes performance. Riven turned to Lex, who was busy eyeing the flickering lights with suspicion. Lex, I need you to keep an eye on the ship systems. Make sure nothing decides to explode while we're figuring this out. Sure thing, Captain, Lex replied, already scanning the status readouts with the air of someone who expected the worst and was rarely disappointed. As they worked, Riven couldn't help but think about the last time they'd been caught in a mess like this. It had involved a malfunctioning warp drive, a missing box of ration bars, and a crew that had nearly been abandoned on a frozen moon. Good times. Got something, Nix announced, pulling Riven from his reverie. There's a fluctuation in the time dilation field. We might be able to use it to stabilize the loop. How? Lex chimed in, glancing over from his station with genuine curiosity. I thought time dilation was just a fancy way of saying, we're all getting older at different rates. Normally, yes, Nix replied, but if we can sync our ship systems with the loop's core frequency, we might be able to force a stable reset point. Riven nodded, already running through possibilities in his mind. If we can stabilize the loop, we might be able to ride it out and break free once we have control. Right, Lex said with a grimace. And if we can't, then we keep reliving this nightmare indefinitely, Riven answered, deadpan. No pressure. Just another day in paradise, Nix muttered, diving back into her work. Time ticked by in that strange, elastic way it does when you're stuck in a situation that could go catastrophically wrong at any moment. The hum of the Aeolus's systems seemed to grow louder, as if the ship itself was aware of the stakes and was holding its breath. Okay, Nix said after what felt like an eternity. I've got a lock on the frequency. If we can sync our systems, we might have a shot at stabilizing. Riven nodded, moving to the central console. All right, let's do this. Lex, keep an eye on the diagnostics. Nix, you're with me. The crew sprang into action, each member focused on their task with a determination that belied their usual irreverence. Riven's hands danced over the controls, his mind a blur of calculations and half-formed plans. Syncing now, Nix said, her voice tinged with the kind of anticipation that usually precedes either triumph or disaster. The Aeolus shuddered, a jarring reminder of their precarious state. Riven held his breath, watching as the ship's systems flickered, then stabilized. We've got stability, Nix reported, her relief palpable. For now. Good, Riven replied, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Now we just need to ride this out until we can find a break in the loop. And if there's no break? Lex asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Then we make one, Riven said, his voice steady, belying the chaotic swirl of thoughts in his head. Time passed, or at least Riven assumed it did. Within the time loop, it was hard to tell if they were moving forward or simply bouncing from one moment to the next like a cosmic pinball. Riven, Nix said suddenly, her tone urgent. I think I've found a weak spot in the loop. Where? Riven demanded, his attention snapping to her like a dog to a whistle. Here, Nix said, pointing to a section of the readout where a fluctuation in time dilation was marked. If we can exploit this, we might be able to punch through and break free. Riven nodded, his mind racing. All right, let's do it. Lex, get ready to reroute power to the engines. We're going to need every ounce of thrust we've got. On it, Lex replied, already moving to comply. The ship shuddered again, a deep, bone-rattling vibration that sent a thrill of anticipation through Riven. There was a chance. A slim, improbable chance, but a chance nonetheless. Engage full thrust on my mark, Riven ordered, his eyes fixed on the monitor where the fluctuation danced like a mirage. Ready, Nix confirmed, her hands poised over the controls. 3, 2, 1, mark. The Aeolus surged forward, engines roaring to life with a ferocity that belied their patched-together nature. Riven felt the familiar pull of acceleration, the reassuring weight of momentum as they shot toward the weak spot in the loop. Come on, Riven muttered under his breath, willing the ship to break free. The fluctuation loomed larger, time stretching and warping around them in a dazzling display of cosmic interference. And then, with a sound like the universe itself tearing open, they were through. Silence followed, a heavy, breathless moment where the only sound was the steady hum of the Aeolus's systems, stable and whole once more. We did it, Nix said, her voice filled with wonder. We're out. Nice work, Riven said, his relief palpable. Now let's get the hell out of here before the universe changes its mind. Roger that, Lex said, already plotting their course away from the rift zone. As they moved away from the hyperspace rift, Riven allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They'd managed to outwit the universe, at least for now. And while he knew the challenges ahead wouldn't be any easier, he took comfort in the knowledge that they'd face them together. You know, Lex said, breaking the comfortable silence, for a time loop, that was almost fun. Speak for yourself, Nix replied, though her grin betrayed her amusement. Next time, let's skip the temporal anomalies and just take a vacation. Agreed, Riven said, his smile matching theirs. But until then, let's see what else the universe has in store for us. The Aeolus sailed on, a defiant speck in the vast, uncaring expanse of space. And as they moved forward, Riven knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them with the same irreverent determination that had seen him through so many trials before. Because in the end, they were nothing if not survivors, and that, Riven thought, was something worth smiling about. Riven Larkspur leaned back in his chair, the worn leather creaking under his weight. The Aeolus was finally free from the cosmic merry-go-round, but the universe wasn't about to let them off that easy. There was always another problem lurking around the corner, ready to pounce and kick them in the teeth. Okay, folks, Riven said, addressing the crew with the air of someone who'd just found out his shoes were on fire but was too tired to care. We've managed to escape the time loop, but I've got a feeling our day's not over yet. Lex glanced up from his console, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. Is it ever? The universe has all the mercy of a tax collector on speed. Nyx let out a dry chuckle, tapping away at her display with the kind of focus usually reserved for defusing bombs. Well, I've got some news that might make your day brighter. Or darker, depending on how you feel about being manipulated on a molecular level. Riven raised an eyebrow. Oh, do tell. Sounds delightful. Remember our friends, the Althari? Nyx asked, sarcasm dripping from every word. Turns out they're running some experiments. Something about modifying human behavior. Lex's laughter was sharp and humorless. Great, as if we needed another reason not to trust aliens with names that sound like a rejected Scrabble word. Riven grimaced. What sort of modifications are we talking about here? From what I can gather, they're trying to, tone down humanity's more violent tendencies, Nyx explained, shooting Riven a look that said she didn't buy it for a second. But it seems to be having some side effects. Side effects? Riven echoed, already dreading the answer. Yeah, Nyx replied, biting her lip. Mood swings, loss of inhibitions, general unpredictability. Basically, turning us into a bunch of hormonal teenagers. Perfect, Lex drawled. Just what we needed. A ship full of unstable messes trying to keep it together while we dodge cosmic anomalies. Riven pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to stave off the headache building behind his eyes. So, what you're saying is, not only are we stuck with alien-induced puberty, but we've also got to counteract whatever the Althari are up to before we all start smashing things just for fun. Nyx shrugged, her expression one of resigned amusement. Pretty much. Well, at least it's not boring, Riven said, with a laugh that was more exasperation than humor. Let's see if we can't pull ourselves together long enough to get some answers. Answers? Lex repeated, a skeptical eyebrow arching upward. And how do you propose we do that, Captain? Ask them nicely. Why not? I'm sure a little charm offensive can work wonders, Riven replied with a grin that was more teeth than warmth. Assuming, of course, they haven't already fried our brains beyond repair. Guess it's worth a shot, Nyx said, a wry smile tugging at her lips. After all, we've got to do something before the crew starts regressing into cave people. Riven nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. All right, let's see if we can make contact with the Althari. Maybe we can persuade them to recalibrate their experiments. Persuade them? Lex snorted. We might need more than pretty words for that. Then let's hope they're as susceptible to logic as they are resistant to bullets, Riven replied, turning to the comms console with a determination that belied the chaos rattling in his skull. The silence stretched as the comm channel crackled to life, the ship's systems humming with a tension that seemed to vibrate through the very hull. This is Captain Riven Larkspur of the Aeolus, he spoke, his voice steady, though his heart hammered like a drum in his chest. We'd like to talk about these experiments you're running. There was a long pause, the kind that spoke volumes without saying a word. Finally, a calm, measured voice broke through the static, resonating with a serene authority that set Riven's teeth on edge. Captain Riven Larkspur, the Althari voice intoned, each syllable rolling like a wave. We acknowledge your presence. State your intentions. Riven exchanged a glance with Nyx, who gave him a nod of encouragement. We understand you're conducting experiments that are, shall we say, affecting the crew's behavior. We're here to discuss the implications. Another pause, during which Riven half expected to be vaporized for his audacity. Instead, the Althari's reply was calm, almost clinical. The modifications are intended to enhance your species' potential for peace and cooperation. Resistance is counterproductive. Right, Lex muttered under his breath. Because nothing says peace like a bunch of humans going haywire. Counterproductive or not, it's interfering with our operations, Riven pressed, trying to keep his frustration in check. We need you to stop. The procedure is nearing completion, the Althari replied, their tone smooth as polished glass. Interruption would be ill-advised. Riven's jaw clenched. And what if we're not thrilled about being your guinea pigs? Your objections are noted, came the response, eerily devoid of emotion. But the benefits will be substantial. Nyx rolled her eyes, her fingers flying over her console as she ran diagnostics. Substantial doesn't exactly reassure me. Unless by substantial, they mean we're substantially screwed. Look, we're willing to cooperate, Riven said, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. But not if it means losing control of our own minds. Silence again, the kind that felt like the universe holding its breath. Your concerns will be considered, the Althari finally replied, the statement as close to a dismissal as any Riven had ever heard. Considered, Riven repeated, incredulous. That's it, for now, the Althari replied before the channel closed with a finality that left no room for argument. Well, that went about as well as a lead balloon, Lex quipped, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation. Riven let out a long, slow breath. We've got to figure out how to counteract this before it gets worse. Assuming it can get worse, Lex added, his sarcasm a thin shield against the creeping reality. Nyx tapped a series of commands into her console, her focus fierce. I'm working on it. There's got to be a way to isolate the frequency they're using. If we can disrupt the signal, maybe we can negate its effects. Worth a shot, Riven agreed, pacing the deck with restless energy. Keep at it. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension, each crew member grappling with their own fears as they worked to find a solution. Hey, Riven, Nyx said suddenly, breaking the oppressive quiet. I might have something. Yeah, Riven asked, his interest piqued. I've isolated a pattern in the signal, Nyx explained, her expression alight with determination. If we can generate a counter-frequency, it might just scramble their modifications. Scramble, huh, Lex drawled. Sounds like a plan. Or at least, it sounds like something that might not end with us all drilling on the floor. Better than nothing, Riven agreed, nodding to Nyx. Let's get it done. Nyx's fingers flew over the controls, a blur of motion as she worked to generate the counter-frequency. The hum of the ship grew louder, an invisible orchestra playing to an audience on the brink of disaster. Ready, Nyx announced, her voice edged with fierce determination. Engaging counter-frequency, now. The Aeolus shuddered, the vibrations rattling through the deck plates like the foreboding growl of some ancient beast. Riven held his breath, watching the monitors for any sign of change. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity as they waited to see if their gamble would pay off. Then, slowly, the tension began to ebb, a gradual easing that was almost imperceptible at first. Riven felt the shift, the subtle lifting of the fog that had clouded his mind. It's working, Nyx said, her relief palpable. The crew's neural patterns are stabilizing. Let's hope it holds, Riven replied, though a smile tugged at his lips. Nice work, Nyx. Don't thank me yet, Nyx warned, though her eyes sparkled with a sense of triumph. We're not out of the woods. Are we ever? Lex quipped, his grin as sharp as a razor. I think the universe knows us by name at this point. Riven chuckled, the sound more genuine than it had been in days. All right, let's keep this ship running long enough to get clear of the Althari's influence. Music to my ears, Lex said, turning back to his console with renewed focus. As they moved away from the Althari's domain, Riven allowed himself a moment to reflect on the day's events. They'd faced down time loops, alien experiments, and their own inner demons, and emerged on the other side, a little worse for wear but still standing. Hey, Riven, Nyx said, breaking his reverie. Do you think we'll ever get a mission where everything goes smoothly? Riven laughed, the sound rich and warm. Not likely, but that's what makes it fun, right? Speak for yourself, Lex interjected, his tone dry as desert sand. I'd kill for a little boredom. Maybe next time, Riven replied, knowing full well the universe had other plans. The Aeolus sailed on, a lone light in the dark expanse of space. And as they continued their journey, Riven knew they'd face whatever came next with the same irreverent tenacity that had seen him through so many challenges before. Because in the end, they were nothing if not survivors, and that, he thought, was worth holding on to. The ship shuddered violently, like a drunk stumbling out of a bar fight, and Riven found himself gripping the console for dear life. The Aeolus was once again caught in the malevolent grasp of a time loop, an infinite circle that was becoming less and less manageable by the iteration. And boy, did it show. Hang on, folks, Riven barked over the ship's intercom, hoping his voice carried more assurance than he felt. Looks like we're heading for another round of, how screwed can we get? Lex, strapped in at his station, shot him a sardonic look. Just what I wanted, a never-ending rerun of our own demise. I love a good sitcom, but this is ridiculous. Could be worse, Nyx piped up from her console, though the lines of fatigue under her eyes suggested otherwise. We could be stuck in a rom-com. Imagine living the same meet cute over and over. Wouldn't be so bad if it came with a happy ending, Lex countered. But we both know the universe is more of a tragic playwright. The ship groaned again, the metal protesting the cosmic forces at work. Each reset of the time loop left the Aeolus a little more shaken, systems glitching like an old arcade machine on its last leg. It was enough to make Riven wish he'd paid more attention in engineering class. This loop feels different, Nix said, frowning at her readouts. Like it's getting tighter, more unstable. Great, Riven muttered. So not only do we have alien mind games to deal with, but the universe has decided to up the difficulty level. Lex looked up from his console, a wry grin tugging at his lips. Maybe it's just trying to keep things interesting. Can't have us getting complacent, now can it? Right, Riven said, shaking his head. Because complacency is definitely our biggest problem right now. The silence that followed was heavy with a mix of tension and the resigned acceptance that they were trapped, again, in a loop of cosmic incompetence. The kind that could drive a crew to madness, or worse, karaoke. So, what's the plan, Captain? Nix asked, breaking the quiet, though her voice was tinged with weariness. Or are we just going to wait around until our brains start leaking out of our ears? Riven sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. We keep trying to find a way out. Maybe there's a pattern we haven't seen yet. Something to exploit. You mean besides the impending mental breakdown? Lex offered helpfully. Exactly, Riven shot back with a smirk. Because if I'm going to snap, I'd at least like it to be on my own terms. Fair point, Lex conceded. Though I wouldn't mind if someone else went first. Set the precedent, you know. Nix tapped a few buttons, her brow furrowed in concentration. I've been analyzing the loops. Each one isn't just a repeat, it shifts slightly. Like a kaleidoscope. We need to find the common thread. Riven nodded, though his mind felt like it was treading water in a sea of static. Okay, let's assume there's an exit. How do we find it? Well, Nix replied with a sardonic grin, if I knew that, we'd be halfway to a beach on some nice planet by now. Lex snorted. I'd settle for a planet where things aren't trying to kill us every 5 minutes. Daydream later, Riven said, though the thought of warm sand and a cold drink was tempting. For now, let's focus on not getting atomized by the next temporal hiccup. The crew set to work, a ragged band of souls fighting against the relentless tide of time, each of them aware that hope was as slippery as a greased eel. But they had nothing else to cling to, and sometimes there was enough. As the Aeolus trundled through another reset, Riven sat back, watching the stars blur past the viewport. The repetition was maddening, like a bad joke without a punchline. Yet, somewhere deep down, a flicker of defiance burned in his chest, a refusal to let the universe have the last laugh. Hey, Riven, Lex called out, breaking his reverie. You ever get the feeling we're just cosmic playthings? Like some bored deity's chew toy? Every damn day, Riven replied, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. But if that's the case, I hope we give indigestion. The next loop hit like a freight train, the ship rattling as if it were ready to shake itself apart. Riven blinked, feeling the déjà vu settle over him like an unwelcome guest. The same controls, the same readouts, the same impending sense of doom. Back at it again, Nix sighed. Maybe this time we'll get lucky. Or maybe we'll just perfect our routine, Lex quipped, his voice laced with irony. Practice makes perfect, right? Riven grimaced, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a ton of space debris. Just once, I'd like to see one of these loops end with us not in mortal peril. Dream big, Captain, Lex said with mock cheer. I hear it's all the rage. The ship lurched, a sudden shift that sent Riven's heart into his throat. The loop felt different this time, a sense of urgency that set his nerves on edge. As if the very fabric of time was fraying, ready to snap at any moment. Okay, folks, Riven barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Let's not panic, at least not more than usual. Nix's eyes were wide, her hands flying over the controls. I've got something, an anomaly in the loop. It's like a seam, a way through. Finally, Lex drawled, though his relief was palpable. A silver lining in the storm clouds. Riven's mind raced, weighing options as the ship groaned around them. Can we hit it, before the loop resets? I'll need full power to the engines, Nix replied, her fingers dancing across the controls. And a bit of luck. Luck's all we've got, Riven said, feeling an odd sense of calm settle over him. Do it. The engines roared to life, the Aeolus leaping forward with a surge of power that threatened to tear it apart. Riven held his breath, watching the anomaly grow larger on the screen, a swirling vortex of possibility. Here goes nothing, Lex muttered, his eyes fixed on the console. The ship plunged into the anomaly, the universe spinning around them in a kaleidoscope of light and sound. Riven felt a lurch, a sensation like being turned inside out, and then, silence. The Aeolus floated in the void, the stars serene and distant. No more loops, no more resets. Just the quiet, profound and unwavering. Did we make it? Nyx asked, her voice disbelieving. Riven let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Looks like it. Well, I'll be damned, Lex said, shaking his head. We actually did something right. Don't get too comfortable, Riven warned, though his smile was genuine. We're not out of the woods yet. But at least we're not running in circles, Nyx added, her relief evident. Riven nodded, feeling the weight of the universe lift, if only slightly. They'd faced the void and come out the other side, battered but unbeaten. And that was something. All right, everyone, he said, the authority in his voice a comforting presence. Let's get this ship in order and figure out our next move. As the crew set about their tasks, the familiar banter and camaraderie filled the air, a reminder that they were more than just a crew, they were a family, forged in the crucible of survival. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the Althari and their experiments awaited, a challenge for another day. But for now, Riven was content to savor the moment, a rare victory in a universe that rarely offered such gifts. Hey, Riven, Lex called out, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Think we'll get hazard pay for this? Riven chuckled, the sound rich with relief. I won't hold my breath. But if we do, drinks are on me. With that, the Aeolus sailed on, a lone ship in an endless sea of stars, its crew ready to face whatever came next with the same irreverent spirit that had carried them through the darkest of hours. Because if there was one thing Riven knew, it was that they were survivors. And that, he thought, was more than enough. Riven Larkspur might not have been the sharpest tool in the shed, but he certainly wasn't a dull one. And right now, his brain was working overtime to squeeze out a plan that didn't involve them all turning into cosmic spaghetti. He leaned back in his captain's chair, or what was left of it after a dozen or so loops of wear and tear, and tried to think like a mad genius, which was not as easy as it sounded. All right, team, he said, trying to sound more confident than a man perpetually reliving his own cosmic Groundhog Day should. We need to turn this time loop from a death trap into a damn useful tool. Lex glanced over with a smirk. Got a magic wand hidden somewhere, Cap? We could use one about now. All out of magic wands, but I do have a brain, Riven replied dryly. We're going to send a message to our past selves. A heads up, if you will. Nyx looked up from her console, eyes wide. And how exactly do you propose we do that? Send back a cosmic postcard? Riven chuckled, the sound more hollow than he intended. Something like that. We rig the communication systems to broadcast into the loop itself. An echo, bouncing back through time. Sounds like a surefire way to fry what's left of our circuits, Lex muttered, still fiddling with his console. Sure, if we do it wrong. That's why we need to get it right. Riven felt a flicker of hope, a dangerous thing in their circumstances. If we can pull this off, we can send ourselves a roadmap out of this mess. Nyx frowned at her screen. We're running low on time, and I don't just mean in the loop. The ship's systems are degrading with every reset. We're one hiccup away from becoming space dust. We'll make it work, Riven insisted, more to himself than the crew. We have to. Lex gave a theatrical sigh, stretching in his seat. No pressure, then. I'm all for beating the system, but this feels like trying to win a chess game while blindfolded and drunk. Probably easier, Riven agreed, cracking a grin despite the tension. But we've got something the universe doesn't. Human ingenuity. You mean stubbornness, Nyx corrected, one eyebrow raised. Call it what you like, Riven shot back. It's got us this far. While Nyx busied herself calibrating the communications array, Lex worked on stabilizing the engines, his fingers dancing over the controls like a maestro conducting a symphony of chaos. Riven, meanwhile, paced like a caged lion, silently praying to any deity that might be listening. Though, given their current predicament, he had a sneaking suspicion the only ones tuned in were laughing their celestial asses off. The ship groaned under the strain, the sound reverberating through the hull like a death knell. Riven clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on him. It was a hell of a responsibility, dragging his crew through loop after loop, each one a little more frayed around the edges. Yet here they were, still kicking and cracking wise in the face of oblivion. All right, here's the pitch, Riven said, stopping his pacing to face his crew. We use the loop's reset to amplify the signal. Each cycle will strengthen it until it punches through to the beginning. Then, if all goes well, our past selves get the message, and we break the cycle. Lex looked skeptical. And if it doesn't work? We'll try again, Riven said, though the prospect made his stomach churn. And again, until we're either free or cosmic toast. Sounds like a plan as any, Nyx said, tapping a few buttons to finalize the setup. Signals ready to bounce. Let's hope the universe is in a listening mood. Here's to wishful thinking, Lex added, cocking an eyebrow as he finalized his own systems. And maybe a bit of divine intervention, just for kicks. Riven took a deep breath, feeling the anticipation coil in his gut. Okay, folks, let's give it a go. With a few deft keystrokes, Nyx initiated the signal, her expression one of intense concentration. The ship hummed with energy, a low thrumming that echoed through the corridors like the heartbeat of a leviathan. Riven watched the console, willing the message to defy the odds and find its mark. Message away, Nyx announced, her voice steady despite the tension. We should know soon if it's working. And if it doesn't, Lex asked, though the sardonic twist of his lips suggested he already knew the answer. Then we get to do the whole song and dance again, Riven replied, trying to keep his voice light. But with more enthusiasm. The ship shuddered, the loop closing in like a vice. Riven could feel the shift, the subtle warping of reality as time folded back on itself. He gripped the console, bracing for the familiar lurch of déjà vu. And then, nothing. Silence stretched taut as a wire, the universe holding its breath. Did it work? Nyx asked, her voice barely a whisper. Riven scanned the readouts, his heart pounding like a war drum. The stars outside remained steadfast, unblinking in their indifference. Yet somehow, inexplicably, the loop remained unbroken. No dice, Riven said, swallowing his disappointment. But we knew it was a long shot. Lex snorted, the sound halfway between a laugh and a sigh. Well, at least we're consistent. Reset's already kicking in, Nyx warned, her fingers flying over the controls. We need to try again before the ship gives out. Riven nodded, determination hardening his resolve. Let's adjust the signal. Maybe we need more power, a different frequency. Something to cut through the noise. Trial and error, Lex replied with a shrug. The only science I ever truly understood. Good thing we're getting a lot of practice, Riven said, flashing a grin that felt more than a little forced. Okay, Nyx, set it up for another go. The ship groaned as the loop reset, reality bending and twisting around them like a serpent. Riven grit his teeth, focusing on the task at hand. They had to succeed. Failure wasn't an option. Captain, I've got an idea, Nyx said suddenly, her eyes alight with inspiration. What if we use the ship's sensors to triangulate the loop's focal point? We could target the signal more precisely. Riven blinked, the suggestion sparking a glimmer of hope. It's worth a shot, do it. Nyx worked quickly, her fingers a blur across the console. The ship hummed with energy, the air crackling with the charge of possibility. Riven watched, his heart in his throat, as the new signal was prepared. Ready when you are, Nyx said, her voice steady despite the stakes. Riven took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the universe on his shoulders. All right, let's light it up. The signal launched, a burst of energy racing through the loop like a spear. Riven held his breath, the tension in the air so thick it felt like a living thing. And then, the ship shuddered, reality wavering like a mirage. Riven gripped the console, his mind spinning as the universe seemed to twist and stretch around them. Did it work? Lex asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Riven scanned the readouts, hope kindling in his chest. The stars outside flickered and danced, as if the cosmos itself were holding its breath in expectation. Hold on, Nyx said, her eyes glued to her screen. I'm seeing something, feedback from the loop. It's working. Riven let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, relief flooding through him. We did it. Lex let out a whoop, the sound echoing through the bridge like the triumphant cry of a victorious warrior. I can't believe it. We actually did it. The ship settled, the loop unraveling around them like a tapestry of stardust. Riven felt the tension ease, the weight of countless resets lifting from his shoulders. They'd done it, against the odds, against the universe itself. They'd broken free. Okay, team, Riven said, his voice rough with emotion. Let's not get cocky. We still need to make sure we're not jumping from the frying pan into the fire. Nyx nodded, her fingers flying over the controls as she checked the systems. Everything looked stable, no more loops, just good old-fashioned space travel. About time, Lex said, his grin a mile wide. I was getting tired of reliving the same nightmare. Riven chuckled, the sound rich with relief. Me too, Lex, me too. As the ship sailed on, leaving the twisted loops of time behind, Riven let himself relax, just a little. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, but for now, they'd won a victory that felt nothing short of miraculous. Hey, Cap, Lex called out, mischief in his eyes. This calls for a celebration. Drinks on you, remember? Riven laughed, the sound bright and unburdened. Yeah, drinks on me. Just don't go ordering the expensive stuff. As the crew set about their tasks, the camaraderie and banter filled the air, a soothing balm for frayed nerves. They'd faced the void and come out the other side, battered but unbeaten. Survivors, through and through. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the Althari and their machinations awaited, a puzzle for another day. But for now, Riven was content to savor the moment, the victory, and the knowledge that, against all odds, they'd found a way to outsmart the universe itself. Here's to human ingenuity, Riven said, raising an imaginary glass. Or, as Nix likes to call it, our unyielding stubbornness. The crew joined in, their laughter echoing through the ship, a sound of defiance against the infinite. And as the Aeolus journeyed on, a lone ship in an endless sea of stars, Riven felt a flicker of hope. Because if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that they were survivors. And that, he thought, was more than enough. The Aeolus had settled into something resembling normality, which was a bit like calling a snake pit cozy. Riven Larkspur sat in the captain's chair, the leather worn thin by the relentless grind of time loops. He tapped his fingers on the armrest, watching his crew bustle about with a curious mix of hope and skepticism. It was as if they were sure the universe was just biding its time to pull the rug out from under them again. In the corner, Nix was hunched over the console, the blue glow of the screens painting her in a light that suggested both genius and insomnia. She'd been at it for hours, tweaking the sensors like a mad scientist on a caffeine binge. Across the room, Lex was busy calibrating the engines, his smirk never quite leaving his face. "All right, team," Riven said, trying to muster some pep in his voice. "Let's see if we can make lightning strike twice." "Not sure I like those odds," Lex replied, his eyes never leaving the panel. "Especially since the first strike was, purely accidental." Details, Riven shot back. "We're here, aren't we? So let's rub the universe's nose in it." Nix snorted, the sound somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "The universe might not appreciate that, Cap. It tends to hold grudges." "Then it'll fit right in with this crew," Riven said with a grin, though it felt a touch too wide. "We're experts in holding grudges. Just ask my ex-wife." Lex chuckled, shaking his head as he ran diagnostics. "If we get out of this alive, I'm buying you a drink." "Hell, I'll buy you the whole bar." Promises, Riven replied, turning his attention back to the viewport. The stars winked at him, indifferent and eternal. "All right, let's focus. Time to see if we can make the Althari rethink their life choices." Nix adjusted her glasses, her fingers flying over the keys with the kind of precision that suggested she'd been born in a tech lab. "Sensors are primed. We'll sync the signal across the loops. If we're lucky, it'll disrupt the whole shebang. And if we're unlucky?" Lex asked, arching an eyebrow. "Then we'll have another exciting day in purgatory," Riven replied, trying to sound more optimistic than he felt. "Okay, Nix, hit it." The ship shuddered as the signal launched, a ripple of energy that seemed to defy the laws of physics and common sense. For a moment, it felt like the entire universe held its breath, the silence so complete it was almost deafening. "Anything?" Lex asked after what felt like an eternity. "Hold your horses," Nix muttered, her eyes glued to the readouts. "We've got feedback, stronger than before." Riven's heart skipped a beat. "Strong enough?" Nix bit her lip, staring intently at the data. "It's possible. If we can sync it across the loops, it might just break the Althari's hold on us." "Might," and "possible," are my favorite words, Riven said dryly. "But let's run with it. Lex, keep those engines steady. We don't want to end up as space confetti." "Cap, you make it sound so easy," Lex replied, his tone as dry as a desert. "But I'll do my best." The ship thrummed with energy, the sensation akin to standing too close to a thunderstorm. Riven watched the screens, his knuckles white against the console. It was a gamble, and they all knew it, but it wasn't like they had a plethora of options. "If this works," Lex said, his eyes flicking to Riven, "you really owe us that drink." "If this works, I'll buy a round for the whole damn galaxy," Riven replied, though his grin felt more like a grimace. The stars outside seemed to shift, as though they were leaning in for a better look. Riven could feel the tension, the universe poised on the edge of something monumental. The air crackled with potential, a tangible force that sent shivers up his spine. "Hold on," Nix said, her voice rising with excitement. "We're getting a response. The loops are sinking. We might actually pull this off." Riven's heart leapt into his throat, hope and disbelief warring for dominance. "Keep it steady, Nix. We're almost there." The ship shivered, the loops aligning with a precision that felt like a miracle wrapped in a disaster. Riven held his breath, willing the universe to give them this one, just this once. And then, as if responding to some cosmic cue, the ship settled, the loops dissolving into nothingness. The air felt lighter, as if the weight of eternity had been lifted, leaving them free to chart their own course. "We did it," Nix breathed, her voice a mix of wonder and exhaustion. "We actually did it." Lex let out a whoop, the sound reverberating through the bridge like a victory bell. We're still alive, and we're not looping. I call that a win. Riven allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated relief. It was a sensation he'd almost forgotten, buried beneath the endless cycles of despair and frustration. Never doubted us for a second, he said, though they all knew it was a lie. Cap, Nyx said suddenly, her eyes widening as she focused on the screens. We've got company. The bridge fell silent, the air crackling with tension. Riven turned to the viewport, his heart sinking as he saw the familiar, ominous shapes of Althari ships looming in the distance. They hung there, silent and watchful, like predators assessing their prey. Looks like they want a word, Lex said, his voice laced with sarcasm. Probably want to congratulate us on our brilliant escape. Right, Riven replied, his mind racing. Or maybe they're here to see what makes us tick. The Althari ships drew closer, their sleek forms gliding through the void with an eerie grace. Riven could almost feel their eyes on him, a scrutiny that was both curious and calculating. Open a channel, Riven said, his voice steady despite the knot of anxiety in his gut. Let's see what they want. Nyx nodded, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. The screen flickered to life, revealing the inscrutable visage of an Althari delegate. Its eyes were like pools of liquid night, deep and unreadable. Captain Riven Larkspur, the Althari said, its voice a smooth, resonant hum. You have disrupted our experiment. Yeah, sorry about that, Riven replied, his tone deliberately casual. But I figured it was time someone taught you about informed consent. The Althari tilted its head, a gesture that might have been amusement or disdain. Your resilience is unexpected. We underestimated your capacity to adapt. Well, we humans do have a knack for learning from our mistakes, Riven said, folding his arms over his chest. Even if it takes a few hundred tries. The Althari's gaze was unwavering, its expression impossible to read. Your actions have impressed us, Captain. We propose a cessation of hostilities. Just like that, Lex interjected, his disbelief evident. What's the catch? No catch, the Althari replied smoothly. We wish to observe your species further. Your adaptability intrigues us. Riven exchanged a glance with Nyx and Lex, their skepticism mirrored back at him. And what do we get out of this arrangement? Freedom, the Althari replied simply. And the assurance that our experiments will not resume without your consent. Riven considered the offer, weighing it against the alternative of continued conflict. It was a gamble, just like everything else in their lives, but one that might offer a glimmer of hope for the future. All right, Riven said finally, his voice firm. We accept. But any funny business, and all bets are off. The Althari inclined its head, a gesture that might have been a nod. Agreed. We look forward to learning from you, Captain Larkspur. The screen went dark, leaving the bridge in silence once more. Riven let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Well, that was unexpected, Nyx said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Riven chuckled, the sound a rough rasp in his throat. Unexpected seems to be the theme of the day. Lex leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed behind his head. So, we're not dead, not looping, and the Althari are calling a truce. I'd say we've earned that drink now. You and your drinks, Riven said with a shake of his head, though he couldn't suppress a grin. But yeah, I think we've earned a little celebration. The crew set about their work, the air filled with a sense of cautious optimism. They'd faced the unknown and come out the other side, bruised but unbroken. And somewhere out there, the Althari watched, intrigued and perhaps a little humbled by the indomitable spirit of humanity. As the Aeolus sailed into the vast, uncharted expanse of space, Riven allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. They'd won a battle today, one that had seemed impossible, and proved that against all odds, humanity's resilience was a force to be reckoned with. Here's to us, Riven said, raising an imaginary glass. And here's to whatever comes next. Because if there was one thing Riven Larkspur had learned, it was that no matter how grim the odds, humanity had a way of rising to the challenge. And that, he thought with a grin, was something even the universe couldn't deny. Riven leaned back in his chair and let out a long, low whistle. The bridge was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm when the only thing left to do is assess the damage and hope you've got enough duct tape to hold everything together. Well, he said, scratching the back of his neck where the tension had settled like a stubborn barnacle, we survived that little adventure. Didn't see that coming. Nyx, ever the optimist in the group, was already tapping away at her console, her eyes darting over the screens like they were hiding the meaning of life. I don't think I've ever been so relieved to see a regular star chart. All systems are back to normal. Or at least as normal as they ever get on this clunker. Lex was sprawled in his chair, looking as relaxed as a man with an itchy trigger finger could manage. You know, Cap, I was starting to think we were going to be stuck in that loop forever. I'd already started naming each day. Tuesday the 13th, redo Wednesday, thank God it's the same Friday. Nix snorted, not looking up from her work. You need a hobby, Lex. Preferably one that doesn't involve making puns. Hey, when you've been through the same day 50 times, you find ways to entertain yourself. And naming days was way more fun than trying to keep the engines from exploding. I'm pretty sure everything is more fun than that, Riven interjected, glancing at the flashing consoles. Besides, blowing up wasn't on my to-do list today. I've got enough on my plate without cleaning space debris out of my hair. They all shared a chuckle at that, the kind of gallows humor that had kept them sane through the rough patches. Humor, it seemed, was the only weapon they had that the Althari couldn't confiscate. Speaking of which, Riven continued, his tone taking on a more serious note, what do we make of the Althari offering a truce? I'm not exactly betting the farm on their newfound friendliness. Nix nodded, finally pausing her furious typing. I've been thinking about that. They said they're interested in our adaptability. Makes you wonder what exactly they were trying to learn with their little science experiment. Probably if you poke a human enough times, will they eventually buy you a drink, Lex suggested, a grin tugging at his lips. Or maybe they just wanted to see how many times they could make us say, what the hell, before breakfast. Whatever it was, we've bought ourselves some breathing room, Riven said, swiveling his chair to face them both. But we can't get complacent. If there's one thing I know about the universe, it's that it loves to sucker punch you when you least expect it. After all this, it owes us a break, Nix said, leaning back with a satisfied sigh. And a stiff drink. Lex raised an eyebrow. You're not supposed to drink on duty, remember? I remember the regulations, Nix retorted, but after the day, week, month, we've had, I think a little bending of the rules is in order. Riven chuckled, the sound rough but genuine. All right, I get it. Drinks all around once we're out of the rift zone. But first, let's make sure we're actually clear. He turned back to the controls, his fingers moving with confidence as he charted a course away from the Althari and their experimental playground. The stars outside the viewport seemed to twinkle a bit brighter, as if celebrating their escape from the cosmic hamster wheel. Course laid in, Riven announced. We're heading for safe waters, or as safe as they get in this neck of the universe. Nix gave a mock salute. Aye, Captain. Smooth sailing and all that. Lex stretched, his joints popping audibly. I'm going to check on the engines. Make sure they haven't developed a personality while we weren't looking. Good idea, Riven said, watching his engineer amble off with the casual grace of a man who'd long since given up on the idea of normal. And Lex, don't antagonize them too much. Last thing we need is sentient engines with a grudge. Lex waved a hand over his shoulder. No promises. As the hum of the ship's systems filled the bridge, Riven allowed himself a moment of peace. They'd done it. They'd beaten the odds and lived to tell the tale. But as much as he wanted to savor the victory, he knew it was just one battle in a universe filled with them. Think we'll ever hear from the Althari again? Nix asked, her voice thoughtful. Riven shrugged, the movement causing his chair to creak in protest. Who knows, maybe they'll pop in for a chat in a few decades. Hopefully, by then, we'll have something more interesting to talk about than time loops and resilience. Or maybe we'll be the ones studying him, Nix suggested, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. Turn the tables, as it were. Riven grinned. Now there's a thought. Humanity, the universe's most annoying science project. Nix chuckled. And we're the test subjects that just won't quit. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of their recent ordeal slowly fading into the background. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like forever, it was a future they could shape. Here's to new beginnings, Riven said, raising an imaginary glass once more. To new beginnings, Nix echoed, matching his gesture. With a satisfied nod, Riven turned his attention back to the viewport, watching as the stars drifted by. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together. It wasn't a perfect plan, but then, what in life ever was? Hey, Cap, Lex's voice crackled over the comms, punctuated by the distant hum of the engine room. Yeah, Lex, engines are looking good, though they're still carrying a bit of an attitude from the loop. Might want to avoid any sudden maneuvers that could piss him off. Noted, Riven replied, smirking. Keep them happy, and maybe they'll forgive us for being stuck in a time loop. Or they'll plot their revenge, Lex shot back. But hey, what's life without a little bit of danger? Boring, Nix interjected, her voice laced with humor. And who wants that? Riven leaned back, letting the sounds of his ship and crew wash over him. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they were moving forward. And that was enough. The Althari ships had long since disappeared into the void, taking their enigmatic goals and cryptic promises with them. Whether they'd be friends or foes in the future remained to be seen. But for now, they were just another story in a galaxy full of them. Riven, Nix's voice broke through his reverie, pulling him back to the present. Yeah, I was thinking. If they're really interested in studying us, maybe we should show them what we're made of. You know, give them a taste of that infamous human tenacity. Riven chuckled. You mean drive them crazy with our stubbornness and refusal to die? Exactly, she replied, her grin evident in her tone. If they're going to poke the bear, they'd better be ready for the claws. Agreed, Riven said, nodding. Let's keep them on their toes. After all, if there's one thing humanity excels at, it's making the best out of a bad situation. He settled back into the rhythm of the ship, his mind already moving ahead to the next challenge. The Althari might have been a bump in the road, but they were just a reminder that the universe was vast and full of mysteries. And Riven, for better or worse, was determined to face them head-on. All right, crew, he said, addressing the bridge with newfound determination. Let's get back to work. We've got a lot of space to explore and not nearly enough time to do it. Nix and Lex echoed their agreement, their voices a chorus of camaraderie and shared purpose. They were a ragtag bunch of misfits, but they were his, and together, they'd tackle whatever the galaxy threw their way. As the Aeolus continued its journey through the stars, Riven allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. They'd survived the loop, brokered a tentative alliance, and lived to fight another day. And if the universe had anything to say about it, they'd be ready. Here's to the next adventure, Riven said quietly, the words a promise to himself and his crew. Because no matter what lay ahead, they were ready to face it, together, with humor, resilience, and the kind of grit that only came from staring down the impossible and daring it to do its worst. And if that wasn't something worth raising a glass to, Riven didn't know what was.